Tonight, we travel quietly with the cores of discovery as Lewis and Clark move steadily across the early American frontier. There are no battles here, no moments of urgency, only calm rivers, slow landscapes, and the steady rhythm of a long westward journey. Thank you for joining me again, and if you enjoy these peaceful explorations, I'd be grateful if you subscribed and supported our quiet corner of history. It helps this channel continue bringing you soft stories from distant times. As always, I'll guide you through the spoken story first, and when our slow walk through history comes to an end, relaxing music will begin, so you can drift deeper into rest as the night quietly unfolds. Now, settle in. Let's step softly into the calm world of Lewis and Clark, and the gentle march westward. The day begins, not with noise, but with a hush, a long, soft exhale of the early American wilderness, drifting over the slow current of the Missouri River. The sky, still pale and unsure of its colors, stretches itself open like a great, waking canvas. Somewhere in the east, the faintest shimmer of gold begins to thread along the horizon. But for now, everything is blue, quiet, and half asleep. It is the spring of 1804, though no one here counts the moments in seasons or years. Instead, time is measured in the gentle shifting of water against wood, in the rustling of river grasses, in the sleepy shuffle of men preparing for a journey before the world fully wakes. Along the muddy bank, a cluster of boats rests in the dim light, heavy keelboats and small pirogues tied to posts hammered deep into the softened earth. They sit patiently, as if aware that their long westward voyage will test their timbers, but unwilling to disturb the calm of dawn. Captain Meriwether Lewis rises first. He stands near the water's edge, hands clasped behind him, breathing in the cool, mist-scented air. His coat is wrapped loosely around him, not for formality, but simply to shield him from the quiet morning chill. Lewis is a thoughtful man by nature, slow in his movements, gentle in his observations. Even now, he seems to move with the same rhythm as the river itself, steady and unhurried. Behind him, the camp wakes in fragments. There is notice only the soft murmurs of men stretching, gathering blankets, and stirring the embers of a fire that crackled throughout the night. Coffee begins to brew in an iron pot, the aroma mixing with the scent of damp earth. A few murmured greetings drift through the air, but they remain subdued, as if even conversation is hesitant to break the spell of this early hour. William Clark emerges next, boots in hand, brushing a stray leaf from his sleeve. His hair is still mussed from sleep, and he squints at the rising light with a mild, waking confusion. For a moment, he simply stands beside Lewis, watching the river. "It'll be a clear day," Clark says, voice thick and low from sleep. Lewis nods, slow and thoughtful. "Clear and long," he replies, but his tone is not wary, not even cautious. It is simply reflective, acknowledging the truth as gently as the river acknowledges the turning of the earth. They share a quiet moment together, standing shoulder to shoulder, breathing the same dawn air as the water sighs below. The cores of discovery, those few dozen men chosen for this long journey, Wes move quietly around them. There are no orders yet, no shouts, no hurried tasks, only preparation, done in silence, as though the entire expedition understands that this first morning deserves reverence. Someone rolls up a canvas sleeping mat, someone tightens a rope around a bundle of supplies, someone else sharpens a blade, the rasping sound soft against the hum of waking insects. A pair of men haul a small crate toward the boats. They do not speak, but their boots thump rhythmically in the damp soil. And nearby, Private George Shannon pours himself a tin cup of coffee, warming his hands around it as the last echoes of sleep fall from his eyes. The Missouri River gurgles gently, its wide surface folding into itself, over and over. Mist drifts across the water like wandering spirits, slow and unanxious. Birds begin to arrange themselves along branches and shoreline reeds, calling out in soft, unenthusiastic chirps, still half sleepy, not yet ready for the bright chatter of mid-morning. Lewis kneels to touch the water. It is cold, cold enough to feel like a whisper from lands farther north, where snow may still linger in shaded valleys. He watches the surface ripple around his fingers, fascinated by the way light tries to form on it even before the sun fully rises. He has always been this way, drawn to the little things. The tint of a petal, the gait of an animal, the slope of a hillside. For him, The natural world speaks in quiet tones, and he listens as though each sound is sacred. Clark, meanwhile, checks the keelboat, walking its length with a slow, practiced step. He runs a hand along the side, feeling the firmness of the wooden planks. Everything is sturdy, everything ready. The river has a way of testing boats, but today it seems come almost welcoming. As the sky brightens, the men begin to load provisions. Barrels of flour, salt pork, dried peas, and hard bread are rolled down wooden planks with careful precision. Boxes of tools, axes, hatchets, ropes are passed from hand to hand in a quiet chain. A handful of seed packets, wrapped in waxed linen by Lewis himself, are placed gently among the scientific instruments. Sextants, compasses, and journals bound in thick leather. Each object finds its place with the same calm deliberation. No one toses, no one ruses. The expedition, after all, will not be measured in minutes or hours, but in the slow unfolding of the western horizon. Near the fire, a young soldier hums a simple melody as he folds his blanket. The tune drifts across camp in a low, rhythmic murmur, weaving through the air like a lullaby. No one asks him to stop. If anything, the soft music matches the gentle tone of the morning. Lewis takes out his journal. It is still blank, the first page empty except for the faint texture of the paper fibers. He hesitates a moment, then begins to write. This day, we embark upon a journey toward the Western Ocean. His handwriting is careful, steady. He pauses often, gazing out at the water for inspiration. At times, he simply watches the sunlight grow in streaks and ribbons across the sky. He writes not to make an impression on future generations, but simply because this moment feels fragile, sacred. Dawn beginnings. Always do. Clark approaches after a while, glancing over his shoulder at the script. History starts quiet, Clark murmurs. Lewis smiles softly, closing the journal. It always does, he replies. At last, the sun lifts itself fully over the horizon, still gentle, still muted, but undeniably present now. A warm gold touches the tops of the trees, reflects on the river's surface, and settles against the boats like a blessing. Lewis gives a small nod. Clark returns it. There is no grand speech, no bold announcement, no dramatic fanfare. Only a simple steady call from Clark. Let's step aboard. And the men do. Slowly, without rush, without noise, the boats shift slightly as weight settles into them, but even that movement is soft, almost like a sigh. Lewis climbs into the keelboat, taking a seat near the center, journal beside him. Clark stands near the stern, hand resting lightly on the tiller. Their positions feel natural, calm, familiar. The ropes are untied. One by one, the boats push off from the muddy bank, drifting into the wide, welcoming current. Oars dip into the water with a gentle splash. Perfectly timed, perfectly even. The Missouri carries them smoothly, as though it has been waiting for this moment. The camp they left behind becomes smaller, the shoreline widening into soft rolling shapes. Grasses wave quietly. Trees lean slightly, as if offering farewell in silence. A heron lifts itself from a nearby sandbar, its wings unfolding with slow, majestic care. It glides low over the water, its reflection rippling beneath it, then veers away toward distant marshlands. Lewis watches it with soft admiration. Clark breathes deeply, guiding the boat with an easy hand. The cores of Discovery still quiet, still half-wrapped in the softness of dawn drifts westward. No one speaks. No one needs to. The day has begun. The journey has begun. And all of it starts with the slow, whispered peace of a Missouri River morning. The river accepts them without resistance. The boats slipped farther from the familiar banks, carried by a current so steady and unhurried that it feels more like drifting on a long exhale of the earth than traveling toward an unknown horizon. The paddles dip rhythmically, but softly, creating ripples that spread and wide, lazy circles before dissolving into the moving surface. A thick morning stillness lingers in the air, the kind that seems to press sound downward, softening even the smallest noise. The Missouri River at dawn is not loud or restless. It moves like a creature dreaming, half aware, barely stirring beneath the pale sky. Lewis sits in the keelboat, watching how light shifts across the water. Each minute brings a new shade, silver near the eastern bank, soft blue toward the west, and a warm, golden thread where the first fingers of sunlight catch the ripples. He hums quietly, not a song, but a drifting thought carried on breath. His journal rests on his lap, though he does not yet open it. Sometimes he believes moments should be lived before they are written. The men rowing do so with the slow, patient rhythm of those who understand that haste has no place here. Their oars slip in and out of the water as if practicing a form of ritual, one motion leading gently into the next. Unbroken, uncomplicated, almost meditative. A few exchange small smiles, enjoying the quiet before the day builds into the gentle chores of river life. Clark stands near the stern of the boat, one hand lightly resting on the tiller, guiding the long, sturdy craft around bends that reveal themselves not suddenly, but like slowly turning pages. Each curve of the river opens into a new scene-wide sandbars, stretching like pale ribbons, dense clusters of cottonwoods leaning over the shore, small islands covered in tall grass that sway as though breathing. "Current's kind today," Clark remarks softly. Lewis nods, without looking away from the water. "It seems to want us to move forward," he answers, eyes calm, voice low. "Indeed, the river's mood is generous this morning. Some days it resists, pushing against the boats with stubborn swirls and unpredictable winds. Today, it simply cradles them, drawing them westward with quiet companionship. Birdsong begins to fill the air, but still gently, as though the birds themselves respect the early softness. A meadowlark calls from a distant patch of grass, its notes bright but not sharp. A pair of geese drift overhead, wings whispering with each slow beat. Even the insects buzzing near the surface seem to hum in a subdued harmony. Lewis reaches out, allowing his fingers to brush the river again. The water is still cold, but less biting than it had been at dawn. He observes a floating piece of driftwood dark, bent, worn smooth by time. It moves with the same calm pace as the boats, drifting alongside them for several minutes before slowly sliding away to follow its own wandering path. Baindlewith Private Droulard prepares a simple morning ration hardtack, soft in water, a small handful of dried berries, and a strip of salted meat. The smell mingles faintly with the scent of river reeds and wet earth. The men accept their food without complaint. Simplicity suits them out here, where meals are not occasions, but quiet pauses in the slow rhythm of travel. "Fine morning for rowing," someone murmurs. "Fine morning for anything," another replies with a small smile. Clark glances around, checking the boats trailing behind them. The pirogues glide with equal grace, their paddlers maintaining the same sleepy, steady cadence. No one shouts instructions. No one needs to. Even the youngest members of the corps understand that this journey is not a race against time, it is a long wandering, a gentle exploration of a land unfolding one soft mile at a time. As the sun lifts higher, the river reveals more of itself. The water turns a deeper shade of blue-green. Reflections sharpen. Small fish dot beneath the surface, scattering like silver sparks whenever a shadow passes over them. Lewis watches, smiling faintly. "So much life," he says aloud, though mostly to himself. Clark hears him and nods, "and we've only just begun." The riverbanks widen and narrow in quiet rhythm. Sometimes tall grasses grow right to the edge, brushing the water like long fingers. Sometimes the banks are bare, showing pale, sandy soil carved by years of flowing currents. Occasionally, a lone tree stands at the bend, its trunk leaning, its branches twisted as though shaped by countless river winds. The boats glide past colonies of turtles sunning themselves on fallen logs. They do not hurry to escape. The movement of the boats is too gentle to startle them. A soft plop, now and then, marks a turtle sliding lazily into the water, as if out of courtesy rather than alarm. Further along the bank, a deer lifts its head, ears twitching. It watches the passing boats for a moment, chewing slowly, unbothered, before returning to its breakfast of tall leaves. Lewis notes every detail with careful attention. He has always loved observing the quiet language of nature, the way animals communicate through posture and movement, the way landscapes shift without drama, the way rivers carve stories into their banks. For him, the world is not empty wilderness, but a living, breathing companion on this long journey west. Clark, meanwhile, keeps a steady eye on the river's course. He notices subtle changes, the way the current pulls slightly stronger near the eastern bank, the way a small whirlpool turns just ahead, the way a cluster of floating debris marks an unseen sandbar. His voice is calm when he speaks. "Keep to the center here," he calls softly to the second boat. There's a shallow drift to the right. The men adjust their direction without breaking their gentle rhythm. Their oars glide in perfect synchrony, the water parting around them with soft sighs. Mid-morning, the sun warms the boats enough that some men remove their coats, folding them neatly beside their packs. The sky has turned a deeper blue, cloudless and wide. It stretches endlessly, a vast, open dome above the drifting expedition. "We could follow this river forever," one soldier murmurs. Lewis smiles at the thought. "Rivers are patient guides," he replies. "They never ask you to rush." The boats continue their slow progress, passing sandbars that shimmer in the sunlight in clusters of reeds whispering with the breeze. Ocasionage, the men switch rowing positions, moving with quiet coordination to avoid disturbing the balance of the craft. After some time, Clark orders a brief rest. The oars lift dripping water back into the river in sparkling droplets. The boats drift on their own, carried by the gentle current. The silence deepens not. Empty, but full. Full of wind brushing through distant prairie grass. Full of birds calling to one another across open air. Full of the river's long, endless breath. Lewis leans back against a crate, letting his eyes rest on the sky. A soft breeze brushes his face, carrying with it the faint scent of blooming wildflowers somewhere along the unseen prairie beyond the riverbank. Clark allows himself a moment. They say you see a swell, releasing the tiller and letting the boat glide naturally. His gaze moves across the river, toward the low hills rising in the distance. They are not dramatic, mountains-juiced, gentle, rolling shapes, softened by time and full of quiet promise. "You ever think," Lewis says softly, "that the land is watching us as we pass?" Clark considers this. "Perhaps," he replies. "Or perhaps it simply doesn't mind our company." Lewis chuckles softly, a low, pleasant sound that blends with the wind. The boats continue drifting, slow and steady, carried by the river's calm insistence westward. Even resting, they move. Even silent, they travel. That is the gift of water. Movement without effort, progress without urgency. As the men resume rowing, the day continues to unfold at the river's own pace. No rush, no reason to press forward faster than the current allows. The Missouri seems to whisper encouragement beneath them, guiding them gently around each bend, revealing new landscapes with the slow grace of a storyteller who savors each scene. And so they drift, hour after hour, deeper into the quiet heart of the continent where the river leads, where the plains breathe, where the sky opens wide and unbroken. The west awaits them, but not impatiently, and they move toward it with the same calm patience, letting each mile find them one. The river widens as the morning settles into its full shape, stretching between the slow, grassy banks like a long ribbon of polished glass. The course of discovery continues forward, not hurriedly, but in that same steady, unbroken pace that seems to match the heartbeat of the land itself. The paddles rise and fall. The breeze moves through the cottonwoods. A distant hawk circles in wide, patient spirals, and the men, those few dozen travelers bound westward, move together with a harmony that feels almost practiced. Though it is born from something much simpler than training, it is companionship, quiet, gentle, and unspoken. As the boats drift onward, Lewis turns to look at the men around him. They are not soldiers today, not laborers, not explorers, wrestling with uncertainty. They are simply companions, traveling the same slow ribbon of water. Their movements echo one another, not because they must, but because the river encourages it. The same lean forward, the same soft pull of the oar, the same easy breath that rises and falls with the rhythm of the current. Private Joseph Fields rose with an expression of calm concentration, his brow relaxed, his shoulders rolling effortlessly with each stroke. His brother, Reuben Fields, sits a few places behind him, matching his pace without needing to glance over. The two often work in this quiet synchronization as if the river itself has taught them a kind of wordless communication. Drulard, the hunter and interpreter, whose keen senses rarely rest, sits near the bow, not scouting intently today but simply watching the world slide by. His posture is relaxed, hands resting lightly on his knees, gaze drifting toward the grassy banks. Occasionally, he tilts his head slightly, listening not for danger, not for signs of game, but simply listening to the sounds of the morning unfolding around them. A frog croaking, a distant splash, the crisp whisper of reeds brushing against one another. Even the strong, broad-shouldered Sergeant John Ordway, normally so attentive and deliberate, allows his sternness to soften. He sits quietly for a moment, letting his eyes follow a line of floating leaves as the river carries them lazily alongside the boats. He watches them turn and spin, small green boats of their own, drifting wherever the current pleases. For a man who often thinks 3 steps ahead, this simple drifting seems to please him. Clark looks back at the men, his expression warm. He has always been able to sense the mood of a group, and what he senses now brings him quiet satisfaction. There is peace here, a rare, delicate thing that only the steady solitude of a river journey can provide. Lewis too observes the gentle harmony. He closes his journal, tucking the leather-bound book carefully into a small wooden box. Right in. Can wait. The men's calm companionship feels like its own kind of historical moment, one that requires presence, not ink. Everyone seems in good spirits, Lewis says softly, almost to himself. Clark smiles faintly from the stern. The river makes companions of men, he replies. Nothing brings folks together like moving at the same slow pace. Lewis nods, appreciating the truth of it. Out here, no one leads, and no one follows too sharply. The river sets the pace, and the men follow in unison, bound by the shared rhythm of water and wind. A soft breeze brushes across the surface of the river, lifting loose strands of hair from some of the men and stirring the edges of their shirts. It carries with it the warm scent of wild grasses and the faint sweetness of early spring blossoms growing somewhere beyond sight. The scent drifts among them, subtle but comforting. Private Collins, known for his humor and lively stories, sits quietly today. He has a piece of river cane in his hands and slowly carves its tip with a penknife, smoothing it with gentle, repetitive strokes. He whistles a slow, wandering tune under his breath, a soft melody that floats across the boat like a half-remembered lullaby. No one asks him to quiet down. The tune is peaceful, almost blending with the sound of water. SGT, gas, steady and solid as always, adjusts a rope securing one of the crates piled in the center of the boat. His movements are calm, unhurried. When he finishes, he sits back and stretches his legs, looking out at the distant trees lining the bank. He has lived through many seasons and many landscapes, but something about the quiet openness of this river seems to rest idly on his shoulders. Louis notices the way the men interact not through speech, but through shared motion and occasional glances. A man hands another a canteen without a word. Someone shifts to take another's place at the oar. 2 men tuck their packs a little tighter so that the person beside them may sit more comfortably. It is as though the river itself has woven them into a single quiet thread. A soft splash draws Lewis's attention. Near the water's edge, a beaver slips below the surface, leaving only a widening circle of ripples behind. Several of the men watch with mild curiosity, their expressions gentle, They do not point, do not call out. They simply observe and return to their own peaceful thoughts. These moments unremarkable, barely a sentence in a typical history book, hold the true nature of companionship, the kind built not from conversation or shared excitement, but from stillness shared among many hearts. Clark shifts slightly at the stern, leaning his weight to guide the boat around a slow bend. The keelboat glides obediently, oars dipping in perfect time as the men adjust to the subtle change of direction. Easy there, Clark murmurs, though his voice is not a warning, only a gentle reminder. The men respond without speaking, easing their strokes, slowing the boat's turn. Their movements are graceful, as though the entire crew has rehearsed this simple curve 100 times. But it is not rehearsal. It is the natural ease that comes when individuals move with mutual respect and with a shared sense of peaceful purpose. The river narrows slightly, carrying the boats closer together. Lewis looks over to the smaller pirogues, where the men work in the same quiet harmony. He sees Charbonneau seated near the center, not yet engaged in any intense task, simply watching the river with mild interest. Near him, the French boatmen row with an unspoken coordination of their own, dipping their paddles in slow, sweeping motions. Clark notices Lewis watching. "It's a good group we have," Clark says softly. Lewis nods. "They trust one another," he replies, "and that trust comes softly, like the fog lifting from the river." They fall back into comfortable silence. The boats drift for a time without the need for conversation. The sun warms their backs. The wind cools their faces. The river carries them in its great, slow embrace. Eventually, the men begin to speak in quiet pairs, not breaking the calm but adding to it. Their voices blend gently with the surrounding sounds. A quiet chuckle, a soft exchange about last night's campfire, a simple comment about the shape of a cloud drifting overhead. No one speaks loudly. No one interrupts the natural stillness of the river. Even the birds seem to respect the softness of the moment. A sparrow lands briefly on the gunwale of the pirogue, its tiny claws gripping the worn wood. It tilts its head, curious, then flutters away as gently as it arrived. Lewis observes this and smiles. Even the birds are companions today. Clark gives a small nod, eyes scanning the river ahead. In the early afternoon, the boats pull near a shaded bend, where the current slows even further. The men take a brief rest. Some stretch their legs. Some sip cool water. Others close their eyes for a moment, letting the lull of the river settle deeper into their bones. The companionship remains unbroken. Lewis sits, with Clark on a log near the bank, their feet resting in the cool mud. They do not need to speak. Their friendship is a quiet thread woven through years of shared purpose. "There will be harder days," Clark says softly, almost thoughtfully. Lewis nods. "Yes, but the river teaches us how to meet them." Clark smiles with a calmness that reaches his eyes. Together, the word settles in the air like a soft truth. Not dramatic, not heroic, simply steady. The boats push off again, and once more the river folds around them, welcoming them back into its slow, drifting embrace. The men resume their oars, each falling into place as naturally as a leaf drifting onto water. Side by side, they travel westward not as individuals, not as strangers, but as quiet companions, moving through the great stillness of the American frontier. They drift together, work together, rest together, breathe together, and in that gentle unity, the journey continues one peaceful mile at a time. The river gradually leads the cores of discovery out of the thick clusters of trees and into a broader, more open landscape. As the boats push westward, the world around them shifts in shape and tone. The forests thin out. The air becomes wider. The sky stretches further in every direction. By the late morning, the men begin to notice that the land on both sides of the river has changed. The plains have begun. These plains are not dramatic at first. They appear as long, steady slopes covered in grass that moves in the wind with a low, continuous sway. There are no mountains yet, no large landmarks to pull the eye. Instead, everything seems to spread out gradually, offering a steady and uninterrupted view that reaches far into the distance. Clark is the first to comment on it. "The land is opening up," he says in a quiet tone, watching the wide horizon. Lewis nods from his position near the center of the keel boat. "Yes. This is the beginning of the prairies." That is all they say. No excitement, no dramatic reactions. Just a simple observation, made in the same calm voice that matches the pace of the river. The boats continue forward. With fewer trees near the water, the wind travels freely across the plains. It is a steady wind, not strong enough to disturb the boats, but enough to cool the men as they row. The grass on the hills shifts gently, moving in long waves that look almost like slow breathing. The men glance at the plains now and then, but they do not stare. This landscape does not demand attention. It invites it gradually. It allows the mind to rest while the eyes follow the gentle rise and fall of the ground. Private Reuben Fields rows quietly, settling into a smooth rhythm. He looks toward the long stretches of grass and nods to himself. "There's a lot of land out here," he says softly, mostly thinking aloud. "It seems to go on forever," his brother Joseph replies in a calm, steady voice. Neither man sounds surprised or overwhelmed. They are simply noticing the openness around them, the same way they notice the wind or the movement of the river. Louis eventually opens his journal to record the change in scenery. His handwriting is even unhurried as he describes the plains in simple terms. Low hills, tall grasses, quiet open spaces, and distant groves of trees spaced far apart. He makes a note about the wildlife as well, because even within this calm landscape, there is movement. A small herd of deer grazes near the bank, pausing only briefly to lift their heads as the boats pass. They do not run. They simply watch for a few minutes before returning to their quiet grazing. Further along, a group of pelicans floats in the shallow water near a sand. Their large wings rest easily at their sides, and they occasionally dip their bills into the water in slow, deliberate motions. Clark observes them with mild interest. "Plenty of game out here," he says in a matter-of-fact tone. Louis nods. Yes, the plains seem to support many animals. The men continue rowing. The pace of their oars does not change. The plains do not require any adjustment. They only mark a new stage of the journey. At on midday, the sun sits high in the sky, bright but not harsh. With the land so open, there is nothing to block the warm sunlight. It settles across the boats, and the men, warming their backs and bringing a slow, relaxed heaviness to the air. A few of the men remove their jackets and place them beside their packs. No one speaks loudly. No one complains. They simply adjust to the warmth and continue rowing at the same gentle pace. The river remains calm. Its surface reflects the open sky, creating a broad, bright expanse, broken only by the steady dip of the oars. The banks are softer now, with gentle slopes instead of steep edges. Grasses grow right to the waterline in many places, brushing lightly against the boats as they pass. Louis studies the plains with a curious but calm focus that comes naturally to him. He notes the types of grasses, some tall, some short, all moving steadily in the wind. He observes the colors as well. Despite the simplicity of the landscape, the plains offer a variety of greens and muted yellows that blend smoothly together, forming a calm, continuous pattern. Clark observes the land from a practical standpoint. He notes where the banks appear stable and where erosion has shaped the edges. He watches for signs of shallow water or hidden sandbars. The plains may be peaceful, but the river still requires attention. At one point, they pass a long stretch of land where bison tracks cross the soft soil. The men notice them but do not become excited. The tracks simply indicate that the animals passed through recently. None of the men expect to see a large herd at this time of day. They simply observe the evidence and continue onward. Private Collins points toward a distant rise. "Looks like more grass up there," he says casually. SGT gas nods. Nothing but grass for miles, it seems. The conversation ends there. There is nothing more to say. The plains speak for themselves, steady, open, and quiet. As the boats continue westward, the sky remains clear. The lack of trees allows the men to see clouds forming far in the distance. A few small, soft clouds appear on the horizon, but they drift slowly, showing no sign of rain. Louis records the weather in his journal. He notes that the day is warm, the wind steady, and the sky clear. His descriptions are simple, built from careful observation rather than emotion. Around mid-afternoon, the men pause their rowing for a short rest. The boats drift gently with the current. The silence is steady, uninterrupted. Some of the men take the opportunity to stretch their hands or adjust their seats. Others close their eyes briefly, letting the steady motion of the river support them. Louis takes another moment to look at the plains. "It is a wide country," he says quietly. Clark agrees, with a short nod. "Yes, wide and open." Neither man adds anything more. The openness of the plains does not inspire dramatic thought. It settles into the mind slowly, quietly, like a long breath. The river turns slightly, and the boats follow the curve. The movement is slow and smooth. The men adjust their paddles without speaking. The land shifts with the bend, revealing slightly higher hills on the northern side. The hills are gentle, with soft slopes covered in grasses that continue unbroken to the crest. As the afternoon continues, more wildlife becomes visible. A few pronghorn appear at the top of a distant rise, standing still for several minutes before walking down the slope. Their movements are calm and even matching the quiet pace of the day. A fox crosses near the riverbank, stopping to watch the boats before disappearing into the tall grass. Drulard notices these animals, but makes no special comment. He simply nods at the sightings and returns his eyes to the river ahead. The landscape does not demand a reaction from him. It simply exists, steady and open. Clark guides the keelboat around another bend. We'll likely see more open ground from here on, he says to Lewis. Yes, Lewis replies. The plains will become our main view for many days. The idea does not trouble them. Open land means predictable views, steady winds, and long stretches of calm river. For a journey this long, predictability is welcome. The day continues smoothly. The boats move forward at the same quiet pace. The plains stretch outward on both sides without interruption. The grasses sway. The wind continues its steady movement. The men row. The river carries them. By early evening, the sun lowers slightly, casting a soft, warm light across the plains. The colors shift gradually, turning the landscape into long bands of gold and pale green. The men notice the change but do not react strongly. It is simply part of the day's natural progression. Lewis closes his journal for the last time that day. Clark checks their position and confirms that they will make camp soon. The men continue rowing until they reach a suitable spot along the riverbank. The plains remain quiet and open as they prepare to stop for the night. Nothing dramatic has occurred. The day has passed steadily, calmly, and predictably, the perfect environment for the expedition's gentle westward movement. The endless plains offer no tension and no surprises. They offer space, quiet, and a sense of slow, constant progression. And the Corps of Discovery accepts that pace, moving forward with the same calm rhythm, mile after mile. As the sun lowers over the wide plains, the Corps of Discovery begins preparing to stop for the night. The river, which has carried them steadily throughout the day, slows its pace near a broad bend, where the bank rises gently above the water. Clark studies the shoreline for a moment, then gives a simple nod. "This will do," he says, in a quiet, steady tone. That is all the men need to hear. They guide the boats toward the bank, using short, controlled strokes of their paddles. The keelboat settles softly against the mud, and the smaller pirogues follow. There is no rushing or shouting. The day has been long, but not difficult, and the men move with the same calm rhythm they have kept since morning. One by one, they climb out of the boats. Their boots press into the soft soil with a muted sound, leaving clear prints behind. The plains stretch out on both sides, open and quiet. A few birds settle in the tall grass. The wind moves gently across the land, steady and cool after the warmth of the daylight hours. Lewis steps onto the bank and looks around. He studies the slope, the grass line, the arrangement of trees in the distance, and then gives a small nod of approval. "Yes," he says softly, "this is a good place to rest." The men begin their usual routine. They unload a few crates of supplies, set aside their oars, and stretch their arms and legs after the steady rowing. They do not speak much at first. The calm of the day has carried into the evening, and everything they do matches that peaceful tempo. Private Gas and Private Shields walk a short distance inland to gather firewood. They do not need to travel far. The plains may be open, but fallen branches and dry scrub can still be found along the river's edge. They pick up pieces of wood, testing the weight and dryness with practiced hands. Their pace is consistent and unhurried. Near the boats, Drulard begins to prepare the fire pit. He clears a small circle of ground, brushing away loose grass and smoothing the soil with the flat of his hand. He builds a simple structure of twigs and small branches, layering them carefully so the fire will take his ollie. When Gas and Shields return with larger pieces of wood, Drulard nods in quiet thanks and arranges them nearby. Lewis and Clark walk the perimeter of the camp area, taking note of everything out of habitation: height of the bank, visibility from the river, and the condition of the nearby grass. Their conversation is minimal. Clark comments, "Ground is level." Lewis answers, "Yes. It will be comfortable," and they continue their inspection. By the time the sun reaches the horizon, turning the sky into wide bands of pale orange and yellow, the fire is ready to be lit. Droulard crouches beside his arrangement of twigs and strikes flint against steel. The spark catches easily, and within moments, the fire begins to crackle softly. The sound is small but steady, the kind of sound that creates a sense of ease. The men gather around the fire in a loose circle. No one rushes to sit. Each man chooses a place, slowly, settling down with a quiet sigh or adjusting his coat around his shoulders. The warmth from the fire spreads gradually, pushing back the cool edge of the evening. Louis watches the flames for a moment before opening his journal. He writes a simple line about the day's travel, the calm river, the open plains, the lack of difficulty. His handwriting remains clear and neat, even in the dimming light. After a few sentences, he closes the journal, places it beside him, and rests his hands on his knees. Clark stirs a small pot of food set over the fire. It is a simple meal: pork, flour, and a bit of dried vegetable. Nothing elaborate, nothing strongly seasoned. The food suits the journey. Plain, filling, dependable. Clark lifts a spoon, checks the consistency, and gives a small nod. "It's ready," he says. The men begin to take their portions. Each one serves himself calmly, keeping the circle moving at a slow, steady pace. Some eat quietly. Some take small sips of water. Their voices remain low. The day has given them enough activity that conversation feels optional rather than necessary. After the meal, the air cools more noticeably. The plains lose their warm colors and shift into muted tone, soft blues, dark greens, and the faint silver of starlight beginning to appear. The fire provides the main brightness now, its orange glow reflecting on the men's faces in smooth, steady flicker. A few men begin simple tasks to prepare for the night. Reuben Fields checks the ropes securing the boats, making sure they will not drift in the night. Shannon arranges a small stack of firewood nearby so the flames can be fed easily until everyone settles to sleep. Collins rinses the cooking pot with river water and sets it upside down near the fire to dry. No one rushes through these tasks. The quiet evening pace holds steady. Louis looks upward as the first stars become more visible. The open plains offer a wide, unobstructed view of the sky. It spreads out above them like a broad, calm ceiling. The stars appear slowly, one after another, until the sky begins to fill with them. "Clear night," Louis says quietly. Clark nods. "Yes. No clouds at all." The men sit around the fire, each in his own quiet thoughts. Someone hums a soft tune, not loud, not sharp. The melody is simple, more like a slow repetition of a few notes than a full song. It blends easily into the background, becoming part of the calm rather than standing out against it. Occasionally, a faint rustle moves through the grass nearby. The men glance toward the sound, but no one reacts strongly. It is likely a small animal, a fox, a rabbit, or perhaps a bird settling for the night. These sounds are familiar along the river, and none of them suggest trouble. Louis speaks to Clark in a low voice. "The plains seem even larger at dusk." "They do," Clark replies. "There's nothing to break the view." Both men fall silent again, returning their eyes to the fire. The flames rise and fall gently. The wood crackles at a slow, steady rate. The smell of the smoke drifts upward and mixes with the cool night air. The men sit with their coats wrapped loosely around them, resting tired arms and legs after the day's steady rowing. Little by little, the conversation fades entirely. Even the quiet tune that had been humming in the background comes to a natural end. The fire remains steady. The breeze continues its slow movement across the plains. The river flows calmly in the dark. Louis eventually stands and takes a few slow steps away from the fire to look at the river. The surface reflects the faint light of the stars. He observes the calmness of the current, then returns to the fire without speaking. His brief walk seems to be more a part of his nightly routine than anything prompted by concern. The men prepare their sleeping arrangements. Some lie on blankets near the fire. Others choose spots slightly farther away, where the ground is softer. They position themselves methodically, adjusting coats, packing bags as makeshift pillows, and ensuring their personal gear is within reach. All of this happens at a slow, consistent pace. Clark watches the final tasks and nods. Once good work today, sighs simply. There is no cheer or applause, just a shared sense of acknowledgement. The men appreciate the remark but do not respond loudly. A few nod quietly. A few simply continue settling in. Lewis sits for a few more minutes, taking in the last movements of the day. Then he, too, prepares for sleep. The fire continues to burn in a steady, controlled way. The men relax. The sounds of the plains remain gentle, mostly the wind and the distant sound of the river moving past the bank. The night becomes fully dark. The stars settle into their positions overhead. The camp grows quiet, not abruptly but gradually, like the dimming of a lantern. The flames cast slow, shifting shadows across the ground. No dramatic events interrupt the evening. No unexpected noises break the quiet. The night remains simple, steady, and come just another restful stop along the long westward journey. The men sleep, the fire glows, and the plains remain open and silent around them. The next morning begins quietly, just as most mornings on the river do. The sky lightens slowly above the plains, turning from a dim gray to a pale blue. The camp wakes without hurry. The men rise, fold their blankets, gather their gear, and check the boats in a steady, practiced routine no one ruses. The journey has taught them that there is no need for speed. The river sets the pace, and they follow it. Lewis takes a moment to observe the land before they push off. The plains, which had surrounded them the previous evening, continue into the distance. The open fields are still calm and wide, but today the horizon shows a subtle difference. Far off, the land appears uneven in places, rising gently instead of stretching flat. It is not dramatic, but the change is noticeable. He points toward the distant shapes. The terrain is shifting, he says. Clark nods, studying the same view. Yes, we're coming into new ground. It is not an exciting revelation, nor a sudden discovery. It is simply the next step in their long westward progression. They prepare the boats, push them back into the steady current, and begin rowing once more. The morning air is cool, and the river reflects the soft colors of early light. The surface is smooth, with only slight ripples caused by the oars. The sound is rhythmic and predictable, with dipping, water moving, droplets falling back into the river. As they move forward, the landscape slowly changes around them. The grassy plains remain, but small clusters of low shrubs begin appearing near the banks. A few patches of higher ground rise in gentle slopes. The land looks layered, now grassland on top of gradual rizzers, with occasional darker patches where shrubs or tougher plants have taken root. Lewis watches these changes with calm attention. He doesn't react with enthusiasm or surprise. He simply notes the details as they come into view. He sees new species of shrubs, observes the texture of the soil on the banks, and takes mental notes for his journal. He will write them down later when the boats stop for the day. Drew Laud, who often pays close attention to the environment, scans the ground as well. More game tracks here, he says in a neutral tone, pointing toward the bank. The marks are shallow but clear hooves pressed into the damp soil, likely pronghorn or deer. Clark nods. The land supports more animals. Once the vegetation changes, the men continue rowing. The pace remains slow and steady. The air warms gradually, and the river widens slightly. They drift around a bend and see that the plains have drawn back a little. Small groups of trees appear, spaced far apart, but noticeable against the open ground. The trees are not tall, but they add new shapes to the horizon. Reuben Fields looks toward them. Haven't seen trees like that for a few days. Joseph Fields answers, nice to see something different. Their exchange is simple and quiet, just as the landscape itself is. The men do not treat the appearance of new plants or trees as a major event. It is just another gradual change along a long journey. As the morning continues, the riverbank becomes more varied. There are occasional sandy patches, areas of darker soil, and small cliffs no more than a few feet high. The river's course shifts slightly, pulling the boats closer to one side, then back to the middle. Each adjustment is made easily, with no tension. Clark guides the keelboat with steady hands. Keep left, he says at one point, noticing a submerged branch near the right bank. The men adjust their rowing without comment. Their movements are smooth from practice, and the boats respond with gentle turns. New birds appear overhead. Some are larger than the ones the men had seen in the plains. A few circle slowly above the boats, gliding on the rising air. One settles briefly on a branch near the water before lifting off again. Lewis notices them and makes a mental note to identify the species later. By midday, the land becomes even more distinct. The plains no longer extend in a perfectly flat line. Instead, the land rolls gently, with small rises that look like early signs of distant hills. The trees increase in number, though they remain spaced far apart. The shrubs grow thicker along the riverbank. The world is still calm, but it carries more variety. "We're heading into new country," Clark observes. "Yes," Lewis replies. "Each mile brings a little more." Their conversation ends there. The men continue rowing in that same consistent rhythm, guided by the slow, wide river. Around early afternoon, the boats pass an area where the land rises slightly into a low ridge. It is not steep, but it stands out clearly after so many miles of flat plains. Tall grasses cover the slope, moving gently with the wind. A small group of antelope stands at the top, watching the boats pass by. Their posture is alert, but not alarmed. They remain still for several minutes, then move slowly along the ridge and disappear behind the rise. Lewis observes them quietly. "Antelope seem common here," he remarks. Clark nods. "This land suits them." Near the ridge, the river narrows slightly. The men adjust their rowing, pulling a bit harder to keep the boats centered. The current picks up only marginally. Nothing here is extreme or sudden. The changes are steady and manageable. In the distance, the land grows even more varied. The hills are still low, but they appear in more frequent patterns one rise, followed by another. Shrubs and smaller trees. The slopes, wildflowers show up in occasional clusters near the bank, adding small touches of color to the green and brown landscape. Droulard points out tracks along a section of the bank. "Elk," he says simply. "The prints are larger and deeper than the earlier ones." Clark studies them for a moment. "More signs as we move west." Lewis agrees. The environment begins to support larger animals. No one reacts beyond that. The men have traveled long enough to treat these observations as routine information. They absorb the details, adjust their expectations, and move forward. As the afternoon continues, the sound of the river changes slightly. The water flows past more rocks near the bank. A few small rapids appear in shallow sections, though they do not affect the boats. The men notice the change in sound soft, continuous murmuring as water moves around stones. Lewis listens for a moment. "Different riverbed here," he notes. Clark agrees. "More gravel, less mud." The shift in landscape continues as the day moves on. The hills become slightly taller. They still do not dominate the scenery, but they break up the horizon in new ways. Shadows form along the slopes. The grass grows in thicker patches. The type of trees changes again, with some appearing darker and denser than before. The men do not express excitement, but they do remain attentive. The landscape may still be gentle, but it is new to them, and they observe each change with calm interest. By late afternoon, clouds begin to form overhead. They are thin and scattered, but they move slowly eastward, creating patches of shadow across the land. The temperature cools slightly, offering relief from the steady sun. Lewis looks at the clouds and nods. "Weather shifting a little," Clark replies. "Probably just light cloud cover." The river bends again, carrying the boats toward a section where the land rises more noticeably. A ridge runs parallel to the river for nearly a mile, covered in a mix of grasses, shrubs, and sparse trees. The ridge is not tall, but it is the largest elevation change the men have seen in days. They observe it calmly. The ridge does not present difficulty. It is simply another step in the gradual progression westward. The boats continue without interruption. The men row with steady arms. No one speaks loudly. The rhythm of their rowing remains the dominant sound. As evening approaches, the landscape settles into a pattern of gentle hills, scattered trees, thicker shrubs, and more visible wildlife. It is still quiet land, still calm, still steady, but it clearly marks a transition. The course has entered a new region different from the plains behind them. yet still easy to travel through. The river remains their constant guide. Lewis glances at the hills and says in his even voice, "Tomorrow will bring more changes." Clark nods. Yes. Step by step. The land will keep shifting. They continue rowing until they reach a suitable place to stop for the night. The new landscapes settle around them as the sun lowers, and the men prepare for another peaceful evening. The day has offered no surprises. No challenges, just steady progress and a gradual introduction to the terrain that lies farther ahead. And as the boats come to rest along the bank, the Corps of Discovery prepares to meet whatever quiet changes tomorrow will bring. When the weather begins to shift, the Corps of Discovery adjusts its routine without any sense of urgency. The air cools more noticeably each morning. The river carries thin sheets of mist that linger longer above the surface. The grasses along the banks start to turn lighter in color, fading from green toward softer browns and yellows. These changes come progressively, one quiet step at a time. Lewis and Clark both know the colder months are approaching. They have discussed the need for winter shelter several times. And now, as the signs become clearer, they begin to look more carefully for a suitable location to build a small fort. The men continue rowing while watching the world around them shift. The once bright plains become muted. The shrubs show fewer leaves. The hills in the distance appear sharper as the vegetation thins. Even the animals move differently, slower, more cautious, preparing for the colder season. No one expresses worry. Winter is simply another stage of the journey. As the days shorten, Lewis points out several potential areas along the river where shelter might be built, though he reserves judgment until a better location appears. Clark studies the terrain carefully. He considers elevation, access to fresh water, and the availability of timber. Their conversations remain practical and straightforward. "We'll need enough wood for both building and fuel," Clark notes. "Yes," Lewis replies. "Something close to the river, but high enough to stay dry." The discussions never grow urgent. They are simply part of the expedition's natural flow. Eventually, after several days of observation, they come upon a stretch of land that seems well suited for the task. The bank rises gently, providing some protection. A nearby stand of trees offers more than enough timber. The river curves slightly here, creating a sheltered area where the boats can be secured easily. The ground above is level enough for a structure. Clark studies the spot and gives a small nod. "This is the place." Lewis agrees. "Yes, we can make winter quarters here." The men accept the decision calmly. They pull the boats onto the bank and begin unloading essential tools and supplies. The shift from travel to preparation is smooth. They store the food in secure crates. They mark the space where the fort will stand. Then they begin gathering timber. The building process moves at a steady pace. Some men cut trees into workable lengths. Others strip branches, flatten surfaces, or carry the logs to the chosen spot. The sound of their work is steady but not rushed axis. Striking wood, branches being cleared, logs sliding across the ground. There is no complaining and no unnecessary noise. The weather is cool, but not harsh, allowing the men to work comfortably. Lewis and Clark oversee the process without raising their voices. Their instructions are simple and clear. Place the logs here. Shift that one slightly. Build the walls at this height. Everyone understands the tasks. The fort slowly takes shape, piece by piece, each log fitting into position with a quiet sense of order. As the days pass, the temperature continues to drop, but the men remain focused. They eat simple meals around small fires. They sleep in temporary shelters until the walls of the fort are high enough to block the wind. Their conversations remain soft and practical. Collins, while stirring a pot over the fire one evening, says, "It's cold, but manageable." Gas nods. "Better to work now, before it gets worse." The work continues. Soon the structure becomes more recognizable. Four walls stand around a central space. The logs interlock at the corners with clean, stably joins. A narrow entrance faces the river. The men build storage racks, sleeping platforms, and a sheltered area for preparing food. Nothing about the design is elaborate. It is simply functional, sturdy, and suited for the months ahead. One morning, frost appears on the ground. The men notice it but do not react in surprise. Instead, they move a bit quicker to finish the roof, knowing the colder weather will soon settle in fully. By early winter, the fort is complete. It is a modest structure, but it offers everything the expedition needs: warmth, protection, and a stable place to rest during the cold season. The walls are thick enough to keep out the wind. The roof is layered to shed snow. Inside, the air remains warmer than outside, especially once the fire is lit. The men begin settling into a new routine. They no longer row or travel each day. Instead, they complete smaller tasks around the fort. Some gather firewood, some repair clothing or tools. Others cook, write in journals, or simply rest. The days become quieter as the river's edge becomes colder and the plains turn the color of winter grass. Inside the fort, the evenings are calm. Lewis often writes at the small wooden table they constructed. His notes are steady and factual records of the weather, observations of the land, descriptions of plants and animals they have encountered. He writes, without rush, listening to the soft crackle of the fire. Clark spends much of his time checking the condition of the fort and the supplies. He inspects the walls, confirms the strength of the roof beams, and ensures that the firewood is stored in a dry place. He is methodical, careful, and calm. The men adapt easily to the slower pace. They tend to their gear. They talk softly among themselves. Some practice small repairs, sewing torn fabric or fixing the handles of tools. Others take short walks around the fort, observing the winter landscape. One afternoon, Lewis and Clark walk outside the fort together. The river is partially frozen near the edges, forming thin sheets of ice that crack quietly when touched by flowing water. They stop to watch the ice move. Lewis says, "The river slows, but it doesn't stop." Clark responds, "It keeps moving, even beneath the ice." Their conversation ends there. They return to the fort without speaking further. Weeks pass in this calm manner. The winter remains cold, but manageable. Snow falls occasionally, covering the plains in a thin, quiet layer of white. The men brush it from the fort walls and continue their regular tasks. They keep the fire burning at a steady level and ensure the food supply remains organized. The daily rhythm is simple: wake, tend the fire, eat, complete small tasks, talk quietly, rest. No one becomes restless. The men appreciate the break from constant rowing. The steady routine gives their bodies time to recover and their minds time to remain clear. Sometimes, on colder evenings, a few men gather near the fire and speak softly about the places they have passed or the land that lies ahead. Their stories remain modest and plain observations about wildlife, comments on the changing terrain, or simple thoughts about home. Lewis listens to these conversations without interrupting. Clark adds a few quiet remarks when appropriate, but neither leader tries to direct the talk. The atmosphere remains easy and steady. Outside, the prairie winter stays quiet. The shrubs and grasses bend under frost. Small animals move slowly through the snow. The river shifts beneath the ice with a muted, consistent sound. Inside the fort, warmth builds as the fire continues its slow burn. Bilate winter. The men have adjusted completely. The fort feels familiar. Their tasks are predictable. The land outside remains cold, but stable. The Corps of Discovery passes the season in steady calmness, preserving its energy for the journey that will resume when the weather softens. Nothing dramatic happens. No sudden events break the routine. Winter simply continues at its own slow pace, and the Corps meets it with patience. The fort stands quietly. The fire burns consistently, and the men rest, waiting for the land to warm again. When winter finally eases, it does not end all at once. The change comes gradually. The frost becomes thinner each morning. The snow melts in patches instead of layers. The river begins to loosen along the edges, cracking in long, quiet lines as the current presses from beneath. The men of the Corps notice these changes in their usual calm way. They observe the signs, make simple comments, and continue their routine. Lewis stands at the riverbank one morning and watches a piece of ice drift away from the shore. "The thaw has begun," he says. Clark steps beside him and nods. "Yes, We'll be moving again soon. There is no celebration, no sudden excitement. Moving forward is simply the next part of their work. In the following days, the men prepare the boats. They check each plank and rope. They load supplies they have preserved through the winter. They organize tools, journals, dried foods, and equipment. Everything happens at a steady pace. The fort has served its purpose, and now the river is ready to guide them west once more. When they finally push off, the boats slide gently into the current. The men settle into familiar seating positions. Their hands take hold of the oars the way they had last season. The rhythm returns naturally slow, controlled, consistent. The river moves between low hills, still pale from winter. The early spring air carries a coolness that keeps the men alert but comfortable. The boats drift in the same smooth way they have since the journey began, carried forward by the wide current that pulls west toward the far-off ocean. For many miles, the scenery remains simple. Shrubs begin to show new buds. The trees slowly regain color. The ground becomes softer. Small groups of birds return to the river, flying low over the water. Each change signals the shift toward warmer days. Lewis watches the land with careful attention. He notes the early signs of spring. The first leaves opening, fresh tracks in the soft soil, and new growth in the wetlands. He writes down these observations during pauses in the rowing, keeping his journal steady on his knee. Clark focuses on the river's movement. The melting season shifts the current slightly, making certain stretches more active. He guides the keelboat around shallow areas, calling out instructions in a calm voice. Keep center here. Shift to the left. Hold steady. The men respond without hesitation. Their rowing remains smooth and even. As spring continues, the land ahead changes more noticeably. The hills grow larger and more defined. Their shapes rise steadily on both sides of the river. The vegetation thickens, with clusters of trees forming small groves along the banks. The plants are still early in their growth, but the land now looks fuller than the plains behind them. Reuben Fields comments, quietly, "Terrain's lifting again." Josie Fields agrees, "Yes. Higher ground ahead." Their words reflect simple observation, nothing more. As the boats push onward, the river becomes narrower, not dangerously so, just enough that the men must row with more attention. The current flows a little faster in some areas, creating light ripples that tap gently against the sides of the boats. The sound is steady and soft. Lewis notices new bird species along the water, recording their size, color, and habits. Drouillard notes fresh tracks from deer, elk, and small predators. The men observe these changes in their usual quiet manner, adding each detail to their understanding of the land. By early afternoon, the hills rise higher still. The river now winds between them in long, calm curves. The men take in the new scene. Slopes covered in shrubs, long stretches of rock layered beneath shallow soil, and exposed roots where erosion has cut into the bank. Clark points ahead. "We're coming into country shaped by more water and wind." Lewis nods. Yes, the land shows it clearly. The journey remains peaceful. The pace remains slow. The westward progression continues, step by step. Some days pass with little difference from the last. The boats travel at a steady speed. The men row without strain. The air becomes warmer. The sound of the river remains constant. Then, gradually, the land around them begins to rise more sharply. The men notice the change early one morning as the boats drift into a narrower valley. The hills appear taller than before, with slopes that rise in long angled lines. Lewis takes a quiet breath as he looks around. "The landscape is building," he says, noting the height of the slopes. Clark agrees. This is the beginning of the mountains. His tone remains even. The statement is factual and calm. The river continues through this changing terrain without difficulty. The water deepens in some places and spreads into broad pools. In other areas, it moves more swiftly but remains predictable. Nothing about the environment requires urgency. It only asks for attention and steady rowing. The hills and early mountain ridges continue to rise as the days go on. The shapes become more pronounced. The tops appear sharper. The rocks become more exposed. The vegetation changes. 2 trees grow taller, with darker bark and thicker branches. Shannon remarks, "More timber ahead." Gas nods. "Yes. We're entering forested country." The men take turns rowing, observing, resting, and taking in the new terrain without changing their overall pace. Nature shifts around them, but the journey remains steady. As the expedition moves deeper into this developing landscape, the river forks in several places. Clark studies the current carefully. Lewis checks their maps and notes. They discuss the direction during pauses. In rowing, neither man speaks quickly. Their decisions are made with calm thought. "This branch holds the deeper flow," Clark says. "It matches the earlier descriptions." Lewis adds, they continue upriver along the chosen path. The land becomes more varied. One day, they pass a stretch where tall cliffs stand on both sides of the water. The cliffs are not towering, but they are the largest stone formations the men have seen so far. The surface of the rock is layered and smooth. The river reflects the cliffs evenly, creating a narrow, straight mirror along the water. The men observe in silence. There is no need for words. As they move through these rock passages, they encounter deeper pools of water, small waterfalls along the cliffs, and occasional narrow channels formed by erosion. The boats navigate these areas carefully, but without difficulty. Lewis records each change with a factual note. Clark guides the keelboat with slow, firm motions. Eventually, the river widens again, opening into a valley where the early mountain slopes stand far in the distance. Snow still touches the highest points, even though the season has warmed. The sight is distant, muted, and calm. Lewis speaks quietly. "Those peaks are far, but they mark the path to the ocean." Clark nods. A long journey, but steady. Their tone reflects the same steady patience that has carried them this far. As days continue, the mountains gradually draw nearer. The terrain changes from hills to sharper ridges. The river bends around long stretches of stone and earth. The air becomes cooler again, but without harshness. The men adapt naturally. They adjust their clothing. They watch the river for changes. Their movements do not quicken or slow dramatically. Everything continues with the same even rhythm. Then, one morning, the mountains appear clearly for the first time, still distant, but unmistakable. Their shapes rise in long, wide lines. The peaks catch early sunlight, creating a faint, clear outline against the sky. Lewis looks at them for a moment. His expression remains calm. There they are, ASOS, simply. Clark studies the peaks, another step toward the coast. There is no cheering, no sudden shift in mood. The mountains are not an ending or a beginning. They're just another phase in a long, steady journey. The river continues west. The boats move with it. The men remain consistent and composed. Their path toward the ocean is not dramatic. It is not filled with urgency. It is a slow, continuous movement through changing landscapes, each mile carrying them closer to their final western goal. And with each quiet stroke of the oars, the course of discovery moves deeper into the calm heart of the land that lies between the plains and the sea. The return journey begins quietly. There is no ceremony, no final announcement, and no rush. After months of steady travel westward and the long effort of reaching the coast, the course of discovery now prepares to follow the river back toward familiar ground. The Pacific Ocean lies behind them, distant and calm. Ahead is the long path, home another stretch of land and water they will cross with the same patience they carried on their way west. Lewis and Clark make a simple assessment of the supplies, the condition of the boats, and the readiness of the men. Everything appears in order. The weather is mild. The river is steady. The men understand the routine. Nothing about the departure is dramatic. Early in the morning, the course pushes the boats gently into the water. The current carries them with quiet confidence. The men settle into their seats easily, as if the journey had never paused. Oars dip into the river in slow, even strokes. The sounds are familiar. Water parting, wood creaking, and the calm rhythm of shared movement. Lewis looks back toward the coastline for a moment. Then he turns forward again. "We'll follow the same course until the land shifts," he says. Clark nods. Yes. The river knows the way. The statement is straightforward and practical. They begin moving without another word. The early part of the return trip feels gentle. The river pulls them eastward with a soft but consistent current. The men row lightly, letting the water do much of the work. The oars splash in a slow, predictable pattern. There is little conversation. Most of the men simply look out at the passing scenery, which now appears from the opposite direction. The forested areas they once approached with curiosity now slip past them with familiar quiet. Trees stand in long rows beside the river. Branches sway lightly in the breeze. Birds call in short, steady bursts. Small animals move through the undergrowth, but do not disturb the calm environment. Lewis occasionally writes a few notes, in his journal nothing detailed, just small observations about the season, the river conditions, and the wildlife. Clark studies the water, making mild adjustments to keep the keelboat centered. Their movements show routine. Their expressions are calm. The days pass in a steady pattern. Morning begins with low mist. Midday brings mild warmth. Evening settles calmly as they stop along the bank. Nothing interrupts this rhythm. The land feels familiar, but not repetitive. They recognize certain bends in the river, certain clusters of trees, and certain slopes of the hills. Yet each view appears slightly different with the season changed. The grass is a different color. The water moves at a different pace. The sky is clearer or cloudier depending on the day. One afternoon, Reuben Fields points at a ridge on the left bank. "We camped near that place on the way west," he says quietly. Joseph Fields nods. "Yes, the ground looks the same." The conversation ends there. The men acknowledge the memory without needing further discussion. They continue downstream, letting the river's natural pull guide them. As the days go on, the men begin to relax more noticeably. The hardest climbing and navigation are behind them. The river is wider now, smoother in many stretches. The pace feels lighter. They eat simple meals in the evenings and fall asleep easily. Their bodies accustomed to the routine. Lewis and Clark talk occasionally in low tones as they study the land. They compare notes. They review earlier observations. They plan for upcoming sections. Their discussions remain calm and factual. "We'll reach the plains again soon," Clark says one night as they sit near the fire. Lewis nods. "Yes. The terrain will ease." The fire crackles softly. The men sit in a loose circle, resting. No one seems eager to stay awake. The steady work of rowing and the soft quiet of the land make sleep come early. The next morning, the course moves again. The boats remain balanced and steady. The river widens as they drift into more open territory. The hills spread apart. The air becomes warmer and drier. The land shifts into long, rolling stretches of grass and soil signs that the plains are drawing near. The men begin to see familiar wildlife. Antelope grazing near the water, small groups of deer crossing the low ridges, and large birds gliding overhead. Droulard points out tracks along the bank. "Elk passed here not long ago," he says. Lewis notes the information without comment. When the river finally leads them into the broad plains, the change is clear. The land flattens. The horizon stretches into a long, straight line. The grass moves in steady waves. The men recognize the openness immediately. They do not react strongly. They simply acknowledge it. "We're back in the plains," Shanna remarks. "Yes," Gas replies quietly. "It looks the same." The boats continue drifting. The river becomes calmer than before, spreading into slow, predictable curves. The men row lightly and talk in soft, measured tones. With each passing mile, the landscape becomes more familiar. The Corps notices small details. They had forgotten certain shapes of sandbars, particular groups of cottonwood trees, and places where the bank rises in clean, smooth lines. Lewis writes short notes about how the land compares to earlier in the year. He records changes in vegetation, tracks, bird behavior, and water depth. His notes remain simple and organized. Clark checks their direction and confirms that they are following the intended path. He marks the river's bends in his mind and observes how the current shifts. His work remains as steady as it has always been. The return journey continues without complications. The weather stays mild. The river remains manageable. The men stay healthy and focused. One evening, As the sun lowers, they stop on a wide stretch of bank. The land is flat and quiet. The air carries a warm breeze. The men unload their packs and gather firewood. They light a fire. The flames rise slowly, spreading steady warmth. Lewis sits down and writes a few lines. Clark checks their supplies. The men prepare a simple meal. The evening runs smoothly, without surprise or concern. Later, the sky darkens and fills with stars. The plains remain silent, except for the soft sound of the river moving nearby. The men lie down to rest, breathing evenly, feeling the tiredness of the day settle into their bodies in a peaceful way. The next morning brings more progress. They travel farther, passing through long stretches of river with little variation. The land changes only gradually. The days follow the same predictable structure: travel, pause, camp, rest. The return path feels steady and reassuring. At one point, the boats pass a familiar cluster of trees. Lewis points toward it calmly. "We collected samples there before," he says. Clark nods. "Yes, that was early in the westward journey." The men look at the trees with quiet recognition. There is no celebration, only a simple awareness that they have passed this place once before. As the expedition continues downriver, the sense of repetition becomes slightly stronger, but it is not unwelcome. Familiarity gives the men a quiet confidence. They know the route. They understand the landscape. They trust the river. When they pass certain bends, Lewis reviews earlier notes. Clark compares landmarks with his map. The journey feels consistent. The river eventually widens again, just as it had when they first traveled through this region. The men row easily now, relying on the current more than their own strength. They drift for long stretches without needing much correction. "We've made good progress," Clark says one afternoon. Lewis nods. "At this rate, we will reach the Eastern Territory well before the next season changes." Their tone remains calm. There is no excitement, just a quiet recognition of steady movement. The return journey continues in this manner, day after day. Calm water, predictable bends, soft wind across the plains, steady rowing, quiet evenings. There are no interruptions and no sudden challenges. The land carries them back as gently as it carried them west. Each mile feels measured and manageable. Each evening brings rest. Each morning brings the same slow start. As the days stretch behind them, the course of discovery moves closer to home, not with hurried steps or dramatic moments, but with consistent, patient progress. The river leads them peacefully. The land stays familiar, and the long journey east continues one quiet mile at a time. The final stretch of the journey moves forward with the same quiet rhythm the course has carried for months. The river continues its patient pull eastward. The land becomes more familiar each day. Trees they once passed in uncertainty now appear like calm markers of a path they know well. The men settle into the routine without thinking about it. Row, rest, observe, and row again. No one speaks about the end of the expedition directly. There is no need. The river and the land themselves signal the approach of the familiar American settlements. The open plains begin to narrow. The vegetation changes. The riverbanks rise and fall in recognizable ways. Each day brings the same feeling of steady progression. Lewis sits quietly in the keelboat one morning, watching the surface of the water. He observes the slow ripples and the clear reflections of the sky. The river looks gentler now, less wild than the western stretches. He writes a short line in his journal. The land returns to its early character. He writes calmly, without emotion. His notes are a record, nothing more. Clark looks ahead toward a bend in the river and says, "We should reach more settled areas in a few days." Lewis closes the journal. Yes, the signs are clear. Their voices remain even. The idea of nearing home does not create excitement. They simply acknowledge what lies ahead, just as they have acknowledged every other change in the landscape. As they row through the morning light, the men begin noticing more evidence of other travelers. A few small paths appear along the banks, worn by footsteps and wagon wheels. Smoke rising from a distant chimney suggests a nearby cabin. Fences show up in small sections, marking early farms or grazing areas. The expedition does not alter its pace. They continue rowing steadily, letting these signs fall naturally into the sequence of familiar sights. During a short mid-morning break, Gast remarks, "Feels like we've been gone a long time." Shannon nods. "Yes, but it's the same river." Their comments drift away as they return to rowing. As the day continues, Lewis and Clark take a moment to reflect, not in dramatic speeches, but in simple conversation. "We have seen much," Lewis says in a neutral tone. Clark replies, "Yes. The land is large, and it changes steadily." Lewis nods, "And we moved with it." That is the extent of their discussion. The journey has been long, but they speak of it in the same calm way they have spoken of each day's work. Toward the afternoon, the river widens and moves more gently. The sounds of water are softer here. The birds are different, more common species that they had seen early in the expedition. The men recognize these details without mentioning them. Their awareness is quiet and internal. They pass a familiar bend and a small cluster of trees. Clark glances toward the bank and says, "We rested here before." Lewis responds, "Yes, early in the journey." The men continue downstream. Their oars move in a slow, steady pattern. No one hurries. The sun lowers at its usual pace, and the light grows warmer. When they stop for the night, the camp feels very familiar. The land looks like the early parts of the river where they first began. The trees are similar. The slope of the bank resembles the places where they camped during the first weeks. The men gather wood, build a small fire, and prepare a simple meal. Their movements are quiet and practiced. Lewis writes a final set of observations for the day, while Clark checks that their supplies are organized for the remaining distance. After the meal, the men sit near the fire. No one tries to fill the silence. They simply sit, listening to the wind move through the branches. The air is mild. The night is peaceful. The expedition is nearing its final stages, and the calmness of the camp reflects that. The next morning, te continua, the river carries them toward places where more settlers live. Occasionally, they pass a small cabin or a clearing with signs of recent farming. The men observe these things, but not with surprise. They simply mark them as indicators that they are nearing the settled regions of the East. Lewis and Clark talk quietly as they drift. Their conversation remains simple. "The maps will require some adjustments," Lewis says. "Yes," Clark replies. "We have more accurate distances now. We will organize the information later." There is no sense of pressure in their voices. They speak of their future work the same way they spoke of building the winter fort or gathering firewood calmly and practically. As the days pass, the expedition receives small signs of welcome. A settler waves from the riverbank. A hunter nods as he passes on foot. A small boat carrying traders moves along the river in the opposite direction and offers a simple greeting. These moments are brief, and the Corps does not linger on them. They remain focused on their slow, steady path. By the time they reach the more populated stretches of the river, the men remain composed. The journey has shaped them into a group accustomed to quiet progress, and they continue that pattern even now. The sound of the river changes, becoming steadier and more uniform. The land feels smaller, not because it has changed, but because they understand it better. One afternoon, Lewis rests his hands on the side of the boat and says, "The land seems peaceful today." Clark nods. "Yes. It has been peaceful for many days." Lewis adds, "The journey has shown us how wide and steady this country is." Clark's answer is simple, and how patient. They fall silent again, allowing the river to carry them. When they reach the final stretches leading back to the Eastern Territories, the journey still holds its quiet rhythm. They do not speed up. They do not celebrate. They simply continue forward until they arrive at a recognizable landing along the riverbank. The men guide the boats to shore. They secure the ropes. They gather their gear. The process is no different from any other evening of the expedition. There is no ceremony, only routine. As the men step onto the bank, Lewis looks around at the land that marks the end of their long travel. He does not express dramatic emotion. He simply says, "This is the end of the expedition's travel." Clark replies, "Yes, we are home." The men stand quietly for a moment. They do not cheer or shout. Instead, they absorb the moment with the same calmness that has guided them across the continent. Later, as the corps settles for the night, the fire burns steadily. The men sit beside it, eating quietly, resting their arms and legs. The familiar contained sound of the flame marks their transition from one part of their lives to another. Lewis looks at the men and then at the fire. He says, "The maps are made. The notes are recorded. The observations are completed." Clark's response is steady. The journey now becomes memory. The fire continues to crackle in a calm, measured way. The expedition's legacy does not come from dramatic events. It does not come from loud declarations or sudden moments of discovery. It rests in the steady, patient movement of the corps across the land. It rests in the miles traveled quietly, the slow observations written in journals, the steady rowing that carried them west and back again. The rivers shaped their days, the land shaped their path, and the quiet work they completed shaped their legacy. As the night deepens, the fire dims gradually. The men lie down to sleep, as they have done so many times before. The sounds of the journey water, wind, fire remain their final companions. The expedition ends, not with noise, but with the same calmness with which it began. Their story settles into history gently, one quiet page at a time. And so, dear friends, our quiet journey with Lewis and Clark comes to a gentle close. We have drifted along calm rivers, crossed wide plains, rested through winter nights, and watched the land unfold mile by mile. Always steady, always patient, always peaceful. Thank you for spending this time with me tonight. If you enjoyed this slow, calming history, IDB, grateful if you subscribed or left a like. It truly supports this relaxing space. We're rebuilding together. Now, as the spoken story fades, the relaxing music will continue for you. Let it guide you toward deeper rest, deeper stillness, and a peaceful night's sleep. Until next time, may you rest well, and may history always whisper softly.